Magudumana will apply for bail at the Bloemfontein Magistrates Court today. She has now spent about 4 months in jail. But back in May, she temporarily withdrew her bail bid, and she's also unsuccessfully challenged the legality of her arrest and deportation from Tanzania. Magudumana is one of 12 accused, of course, of helping Thabo Best escape. In a recent statement, though, she claimed emotional and sexual abuse by powerful government and business figures. eNCA senior reporter Silindelo Masikane joining me right now for the very latest regarding this matter. And Slee, a very warm good morning to you, colleague. I think when that statement by Nandipha Magudumana came out on social media, a lot of tweets were not so certain if this was a credible, legitimate letter from Nandipha, but it seems to stand ground that it is from her through her lawyers, and today she is applying for bail.
Certainly so, and I think speculation was quite rife in terms of the timing of her statement that she released last week. And I think if you read the contents of that statement, you could get an idea or a sense that something was coming. And in fact, I see her legal representatives here to my left, Mr. Advocate Machini Mutlowung. He, of course, has been representing Dr. Nandipha through her applications in terms of trying to deem or declare her arrest and deportation from Tanzania as unlawful, as well as declared invalid and set aside. I am going to try and speak to the advocate. We do know, of course, that we have been witnessing proceedings in terms of the applications and the court processes in Court 17, but the courtroom has been moved to Court 18, and I'm understanding right now that he is trying to just get more clarity in terms of where we will be sitting. Advocate Machin, how are you doing this morning?
Good, thanks, and how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you feeling about the application process today for bail?
Yeah, let's see what happens.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I understand you've also filed papers to the Supreme Court of Appeal?
Indeed, yeah, for petition. Yes.
So you still want to declare her arrest unlawful and set aside?
Yes.
She still wants to be released on bail?
She's still being remanded. She's still coming to court, being remanded. Yeah. So it's still part of the process.
Do you expect to be calling Dr. Nandipha as a witness?
See, that's the defense strategy that we cannot divulge.
The arguments that she's going to put forward, why does she want to be released on bail?
No, I mean, that's the arguments that we'll present in court. Thank you.
All right, that's Advocate Machin Mutlowung. He represents Dr. Nandipha Magudumana. He has just arrived here at the Bloemfontein Magistrates Court. We are expecting court proceedings to start just after 9 a.m., perhaps around 9:30. We are starting with other court cases that will be postponed. But to just unpack the possibilities of the arguments that we're going to hear this morning, I am joined by legal expert Mr. Marius Dutoy. Thank you so much for your time this morning, sir. We've just had an opportunity to try and doorstop Dr. Nandipha's lawyers in terms of what she's going to be putting forward to the court, but at the same time, she's still trying to declare her arrest unlawful. In terms of your legal analysis, what can we expect today in terms of these arguments that she's going to put forward?
So the first time around, Slee, they obviously tried to get the ruling from the High Court in their favour to declare her detention unlawful, which would have meant the bail issue would have been a non-issue as she would have been released. That having failed, she now is only left with the option of applying for bail. Now, we know that the prison officials, some of them got bail, but we know that in respect of herself, the state is going to oppose bail. So I would really be surprised if the court does grant a bail, having regard to the nature of the offence, having regard to the gravity thereof, and of course the extent to which people went to evade justice here. The fact that they went to another country, they went through our border control areas, they apparently there was issues with the passports. So there's a number of things that the court would highlight to illustrate how easy it is for this person to flee should he be granted bail. Because even though the Bail Act, the Criminal Procedure Act, gives various grounds upon which a court considers bail, it actually boils down to one main thing, and the test still remains, will this person flee if granted bail? Because if the person will flee or if he will evade justice, well, ultimately the court should refuse that person bail. And I think in this instance, we can expect that the state would go all out to show to the court that should she be granted bail, the facts of this matter is so unique, and the extent to which they attempted to evade justice is so unique and so elaborate that you can only expect that they could do something similar if she's granted bail. And then ultimately, if she doesn't stand trial, well, that of course affects the state's ability to ensure that justice prevails when a person is convicted or when the trial is done.
Talk to me about the fact that, she's a first-time offender. The court could maybe put some very strict bail conditions. She is facing Schedule 5 offences, but that murder charge against her was also dropped by the state. So it does seem as though she might have a chance here, despite the fact that she could be a flight risk, or am I reading this wrong?
Yeah, so firstly, we have to remember that when you're charged with a Schedule 5 bail offence, the onus is on you to show that the interest of justice should permit your release on bail. So you have to go all out. And how do you do that? You do that either by adducing evidence in the form of an affidavit, or you adduce evidence by calling your client to testify in the witness box. And when that evidence is presented, the state would then have an opportunity to adduce their evidence. And if on a balance of probabilities, you've adduced acceptable evidence that justifies your release to bail, then you should be permitted to bail. But ultimately, when you do that, you have to deal with various grounds, and they've been crystallized in the Criminal Procedure Act. And these are things like, will you evade justice? Will you interfere with witnesses? Do you have a fixed abode? Do you have a fixed employment? How do you have ties overseas? How difficult is it with the countries that you have ties to extradite you from it? So there's a number of grounds that the court has to consider. They would have to consider whether there'd be a public outcry if bail is granted. So the court would have to look at all these circumstances, and then the court would have to say, well, listen, based on your case and based on what we have, I do not believe it's the interest of justice to grant bail, or yes, it is. And I can only expect that in this instance, the state would have gone all out, or will go all out, in order to refute the application and say, well, listen, the interest of justice does not permit your release. Because we know how close she was with the main suspect. We understand to what extent they went in order to evade justice, how they went to Tanzania, how they were arrested there, and the whole process that ensued. So ultimately, it's clear that she would do everything in her power to evade justice. And knowing the public outcry that this matter has caused, because we know, of course, that Thabo Bester was a sentenced prisoner, and he was able to evade justice. And this is his so-called girlfriend, and let's call her the right-hand man or lady that was assisting him in the process. So one can expect the state would do everything in their power to oppose bail, giving or having regard to the severity of the charges and her involvement in the matter. But is it set in stone? Of course not, Celine. Anything could happen, but I would expect the state to go all out to oppose bail.
Certainly so. It's going to be quite an interesting day here in the Bloemfontein Magistrates Court, and it's going to be quite interesting to see what arguments she does put forward, because it does seem as though, of course, that the odds are stacked against her in terms of the prospects of success. But this is court, this is a bail application, and anything could happen. So I think it's going to boil down really to the arguments that her legal team will be presenting to the Magistrates Court, and whether they can convince the magistrate that the interests of justice do permit her release. Thank you so much for your time this morning. That is legal expert Mr. Marius du Toit unpacking what we can expect with this application. And of course, as soon as those proceedings begin, we will be bringing you live visuals here from the Bloemfontein Magistrates Court.
And as soon as those developments are available to us through you, colleague, we'll be sure to catch up with you once again to have a conversation and look back as to what exactly happened. Of course, much to the attempt of Silindelo Masikane to speak to Nandipha Magudumana's lawyers, but at this point, not willing to divulge much to the media, saying those processes that are necessary will be followed in court, and those presentations will be only presented in court first, I suppose, before they can give us a comment. So we'll wait as those court proceedings are expected.